Here we go. It is 1 o'clock, well, 1:01 actually, and we are going to get this webinar started. I'd really love to hide speaker view, but I don't know that I can remember how to do that. There we go. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with our audience. Okay, here we go. Welcome to Fear of Returning, OCD North's first Back to School series. My name is Merrisa Bragg. I'm a social worker, exposure and response prevention therapist, and founder of OCD North. I'm really interested to hear who we have joining us today. So using the chat bar in the Zoom functionality, please feel free to tell me where you're watching from. You can see behind me, I'm in my home office. And just to get a few housekeeping things out of the way, we are recording the webinar because we want to be able to broadcast to as many people as possible during this unprecedented and weird time. Also, full disclosure, I haven't done a presentation using a PowerPoint since grad school. So I'm a little bit rusty, and stick with me, we'll get through this together. Alyssa, our clinic manager, is attending our webinar too. She's going to be our moderator. She's going to interrupt me every so often when our audience gives us a question that requires answering. I'm going to answer that question out loud without typing it in the chat bar. That way it's part of the webinar, and that's important because if you're asking the question, you're probably not the first one. And we want to make sure that we're helping as many people as we can through this. So again, use the chat bar. Please make sure that we're enabling to show everybody, not just the panelists, because again, if it's your question, everybody probably has it on their mind as well. So let me know who you are and where you're watching from. This is our Back to School series. You're listening now and watching part 1, managing your child's fear of returning. And of course, when we say returning, we mean back to school. Part 2 is tomorrow. And in part 2, we're managing the parental fear of returning. And we've captured that as helping you to make that decision, whether or not to send your child back to school because of that underlying fear of COVID-19 and the pandemic. Part 3, we're hearing from teachers, support staff, and administrators all about their fears and concerns about returning or not returning to school. So we developed a webinar just for them as well. That said, part 1 really does focus on the kids. I mean, it's all about the kids. But today in particular is how to manage your child's fear of returning. And here we're assuming that you've made the decision to send your child back. And in my mind, that's back to public school, but that might mean back to private school. That might be back to homeschooling, or last night I heard this new term called pod school. And to the best of my knowledge, that's when a bunch of kids, a small cohort of children are homeschooling together. So if that's what you're doing, that's cool too. It assumes that we're going back to school in some capacity other than virtual learning. Okay, so let's dive right in here. You're going to see me look down. I have some notes. This topic is really important to me. It's evolving every hour. So I have some notes that I just refer to. What you're going to get out of this today. By the end of the webinar, you're going to have 7 concrete strategies to manage your child's fear of returning. You're not going to have 8 strategies. You're not going to have 4 strategies. You're going to have 7. You're also going to know what doesn't work. You're going to hear me refer to OCD. You're going to hear me refer to fear. You're going to hear me refer to anxiety. All of these things in this context are the same. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. When I say OCD, OCD is maintained by fear. Fear is a universal experience. Anxiety is maintained by fear. Fear is a universal experience. So I'm using OCD, anxiety, and fear interchangeably throughout the webinar. Alyssa, at the end of this webinar, is going to send you a copy of it in the event you want to share it or watch it again. She's also going to send you some material that we talk about throughout the webinar. So this is important. When parents are educated about fear, they can remain calm and help their child out of a tailspin. Fear is this ambiguous monster. Once, as adults, we can understand fear, when we understand where it comes from, when we understand how to manage it, we can really help our kids to do the same and get them back to a state of equilibrium as well. Oftentimes when we see our children act out of fear, we also get scared. And while that's a typical normal human experience as parents, we want to really cultivate the ability to recognize in ourselves when we're experiencing that, channel it into helping our kids so that they're not hyperventilating or thinking catastrophic thoughts, which of course is that tailspin we're referring to here. Now the source comes from a book titled Freeing Your Child from Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. And again, fear, OCD, anxiety, it's all one and the same in this context. So we'll be sure to send you that resource at the end of the webinar. Fear 101, let's dive right into psychoed. I love talking about fear. Nobody really likes feeling it, but it is a universal experience, and it's what is called in the therapeutic community as the appraisal of danger. So when we experience fear, every species on this planet has an alert system. So a danger, danger, warning, warning, that something is up. I have to protect myself. I either have to fight or flight or panic and run. This has really helped us evolve as a species. It's helped us outrun predators. Our amygdala shoots off and we get fast and we do whatever we need to do to escape danger. Now this gets difficult when, as highly evolved human species, this alert system is or can become maladaptive. So what we see when fear is maladaptive is that we're reacting to threats that aren't really threats at all. When it's not warranted, when it's not wanted. So sometimes that response can become automatic, and that's when you'll often hear people say, I'm triggered. Now with kids, this is really interesting and fascinating. And it'll be interesting to hear your point of view if your children have a will it hurt orientation to the world. And what I mean by that is some anxious children or some children that have a fear mentality are highly susceptible to trivial passing stressors. So things that wouldn't ordinarily stress you out or didn't stress you out as a child might stress your child out now. They might be reluctant to try new things. And, they might even have some physiological fear responses as well. Frequent stomach aches, headaches, diarrhea, just to name a few. So let me know in the chat function here, does your child have a will it hurt orientation? Is this something new that you're hearing? And tell me about it. Okay, so now we're moving into anticipatory fear. We're gonna go right through to the worst case scenario. All of the strategies in this webinar are going to help you from deciding when to go back through to my kids are back and they're freaking out. The earlier you start to practice these skills, the better off you and your family will be. So When it comes to anticipatory fear in in kids and teens, what we see is it's really all about uncertainty. And as I said at the beginning, although we are a little bit more certain now than we were about mask use, hand hygiene, physical distancing, cohorting, and contracting COVID-19, there's still a lot of stuff up in the air. So, for example, when it comes to mask use, when I developed this webinar 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5, we didn't know if masks would be mandated in schools. So that was the element of uncertainty that I wanted to touch on here. But so much has happened in those 2.5 weeks. And don't get me wrong, we're still very much uncertain, but now the uncertainty is, how am I going to wear a mask for 6 hours a day? When it comes to hand hygiene, you might find your children are wondering about whether or not sanitizer is going to be plentiful, when they're going to wash their hands, or teachers going to make them wash their hands when they come in from recess or before lunch, etc. Physical distancing is a big one right now and has gained a lot of media attention. Kids might be wondering about whether or not physical distancing is going to be a possibility, particularly children with a will it hurt mentality. Some kids might not really care about physical distancing, and some children without a will it hurt orientation to the world will not care about physical distancing to the point of they're hugging their friends because they haven't seen them in months. So physical distancing is one of those things, although we can maintain it until the cows come home in school, what we don't know is how our children are going to perceive physical distancing. And that's not really something we can predict, but that's not something we're really going to know until we get into school. Kids might be wondering about cohorting, although that's probably one of the more certain things on this list. Again, contracting COVID-19. So uncertainty exists among parents, among teachers, among children. When it comes to kids, what we see in the clinic is, I'm afraid I'm going to get COVID-19, and then I'm afraid that I'm going to give it to my loved ones, or I'm afraid I'm going to die. Curious to hear if that's happening in your household at all. Water break. Okay. Into the nitty-gritty, how to manage anticipatory fear. What have you tried already? I'm interested to hear what you've tried for your kiddos. I'm going to really go into the dialogue here around that. So I obviously forgot to turn off the slide transitions here. I meant to do that. Oops. Okay, so we want to talk about returning to school with your kids, obviously. But when we do that, if you get just the slightest sense that there might be some apprehension or some fear, ask them about it. Don't let fear be this taboo subject that nobody can talk about. So ask your kiddos, how afraid are you? You can add, are you low, medium, or high? If you have elementary kids, kindergarten, grade 2, etc. You'll change the dialogue around this for older kids and especially for teens. But let's talk about fear. It's not something that should be brushed under the rug, and I'll talk about that later. What are your what ifs? Okay, so in OCD treatment, I ask about what ifs all the time. Anytime we're talking about fear, we're talking about what ifs. I had this wonderful grade 6 teacher, and he once said to me, or to the classroom rather, we could talk all day about what ifs, but tell me about what else might happen instead. So talk to your kid about their what if questions, right? Because these are the what ifs are going on in their head, and they, usually bottle that up or suppress it, or it comes out in behavior for younger kiddos. Ask about what if questions. Do you have any what if questions going on in your head? What are they? Once you know that, you can steer that conversation and get a different perspective, because the what ifs are very unlikely to happen, but they're probable, right? So, an example of a what if that parents should be prepared for is, what if I lose my mask? What if there's no hand sanitizer? What if I get COVID-19? What if my family dies because I have COVID-19? So you saw there how I was able to, go from, well, no more mask to I'm dying from COVID-19. We see the extreme in the clinic all the time. Ask your kid about their what ifs. If they're nervous about returning to school, odds are they have what if questions. So talk about it. Talking about fear is literally half the battle. Change that conversation. What else could happen? So here we're really drawing out what is the last point here. What do you want to do about it? What do you want to do about going back to school? What do you want to do about this fear? And they're not going to say, I want to sit in it. I want to feel it. They're not going to say that. They're going to say, I want to get rid of it. So that's what we're going to help them to do right now. Okay, so fear is like throwing a ball in the air. And if you have like this quizzical look on your face right now, that's because you might be wondering, well, I'll throw a ball in the air and then what happens after that? Well, don't overthink it. The ball comes down. What comes up must come down. The best thing that works to manage fear, anxiety, OCD is time. So let's get concrete. Let's give fear time, and literally let's not do anything, but set a timer for 20 minutes. Tell your kiddos, I want to set a timer for 20 minutes. And during that 20 minutes, let's just do some really basic strategies. We're going to breathe in slowly and breathe out nice and deeply. This slows down our nervous system. And I don't know if you caught that, but I did that on purpose. I was feeling like I was talking incredibly fast. So, that's because my nervous system was like, Merrisa, you've never done this before. It's a new experience. You should get through it, because the faster you get through it, the faster it'll be over. But I'm really enjoying my time with you guys today. So I just did this, and you'll notice that now I'm a little bit more relaxed. I'm talking a little bit slower. It probably took 20 minutes. I don't know what time it is. Yeah, it's 1:19. So it took 20 minutes. But I'm getting into the groove of things now. And your kiddos will feel the same thing. Let's give it 20 minutes, little Johnny. And we're going to just do slow and deep breathing. That works to calm the nervous system or that fear response system. Progressive muscle relaxation. This is one of my favorite activities to do with kids. So when it comes to fear, we clench without maybe even knowing it. You probably do it as adults, kids even more so without noticing it. So we want to encourage that, because when we clench, we also release. During this 20 minutes, while you're breathing slowly and deeply, clench the fists as hard and as tight as you can, and then release them. Bring in some humor into it. How tightly can you ball up your fists? How tightly can you scrunch up your face and then let it go? How tightly can you clench your calves and let it go? Can you make your whole body as rigid as possible so that when I poke you, you don't even move? Bring in some humor and some lightheartedness. In so doing, you're changing the relationship to fear. You can't feel relaxed and afraid at the same time. And in this process, you're teaching your kids how to cope with fear in a manageable way. in a way that's adaptive. Okay, positive self-talk. None of this stuff is going to work if your child is constantly saying, I can't do it, or I don't want to do it, or thinking these worst case catastrophic thoughts like, I'm going to get COVID, or Johnny at school is going to give me COVID. So throughout these 20 minutes, you're talking positively and encouraging your child to talk positively. You're not focusing on what your child can't do. You're focusing on what they can do. Everybody can breathe slowly. Everybody can breathe deeply. Everybody can clench and release their hands or their body, for the most part. And everybody has the capacity to talk positively. And some examples of that include, I can do this. I'm really afraid right now. I'm afraid of getting COVID. I'm afraid of hyperventilating when I'm wearing my mask. I'm afraid of X, Y, or Z, but I know I can handle it. No matter how afraid I am, I can handle it. Positive self-talk makes a big difference here. Exposure. So strategies 1 and 2, we really want to start implementing as soon as we can. Start before school starts, obviously, so that when we get back into school, kids know, okay, I'm feeling scared. I know that because my heart is racing, my thoughts are racing, my physiological sensations are out of this world. And I'm very much using adult talk right now. Your kids might notice, oh, I have a sore stomach, and we might need to remind them, well, that means that you're afraid of something, or that means that you're stressed. Why don't we use some of the strategies that we learned? Exposure is another tool. Exposure is purposely doing things that scare us so that they don't scare us anymore. Okay, so we do this by a gradual community reentry. If your kiddos are like my kiddos, they haven't been out much since March. They haven't really been playing with friends. They haven't really been going to the grocery store, which, they love, frankly. They haven't been doing any of the things that kids normally do. So getting them back into the community so that they're not overwhelmed at school is a really important step. For example, and work with your kids on this. Create a hierarchy or a list of things that will get them more comfortable in going back to school. It could start as slowly as walking around the block. It could be going into the mall. We want to see our children in an environment where there are lots of people wearing masks, of course, to get them used to going back to school. And in my mind, I'm envisioning a public school environment. But even if you're homeschooling with some other kiddos, these fears can still apply. So we got to get them used to getting out into the community again. And the exposure works for mask use as well. It works for hand hygiene. It works for all of those things. We got to get our kids used to seeing things in the community that they're probably not used to seeing yet, like everybody wearing masks, like hand sanitizing everywhere you go, washing your hands for 20 seconds. All of those things we want to get them used to doing. And we want to set goals when we want to practice. Practice makes practice. The more we practice, the more readily available these skills are in our brains, and the more we're able to grab onto those strategies first before we have this sensation of catastrophizing everything. So if your child is concerned about wearing masks, you're going to know what your kiddos are afraid of, because you're going to use the first strategy. You're going to ask them about it. Then you're going to set goals based on their fears, and that could include setting a timer and practicing these strategies. That could include exposure. That could include, well, let's see how long you can wear your mask. And, it's doubtful that you're going to hyperventilate, but if you do, like, let's practice that now. Let's wear your mask for 15 minutes and see if you hyperventilate. I don't think you're going to, but if you do, I'm right here with you to help you along the way. Odds are your child's not going to hyperventilate by wearing a mask, and by practicing, you're disproving that fear, which is really central to exposure. Emotional regulation. So I alluded to this earlier in our presentation, but here are some strategies. Relaxation, progressive muscle relaxation. This can also look like meditation at night. This could also look like boundaries for school. After 5 o'clock, we're not talking about school anymore. It could be making sure our kids are engaged in an activity that they find relaxing. We're using humor, right? And we can do that, as I said before, in the case of progressive muscle relaxation. Let's be as still and as rigid as you can, so that when I poke you, you're not toppling over. Make it developmentally appropriate, of course, but draw humor into it. Just as we can't be relaxed and afraid, we can't have fun and be afraid at the same time. So drawing humor into things is really important. Assertiveness and bossing back the fear. So that positive self-talk will come in handy here. And for little guys all the way up to teenagers, we can develop mantras to help with this. Your kids are, if you practice these strategies, your kids are going to get really great at knowing their fear cues, and they're going to, automatically know what to do about it. You can help by cultivating a mantra that is assertive and helps to boss back the fear. And you can incorporate humor into that as well. For example, you can't get me, fear. I know what I'm doing. Something like that. Okay. Grab some ice there. So, first day of school, let's picture it. Your kids are probably going to be scared or afraid or anxious or nervous. It's first day jitters times about 1,000, not just for kids, but for parents and for teachers as well. So all of these strategies that you've been practicing for 3 weeks, they're going to come in handy here, because the first 15 or 20 minutes of the first day will likely be the most difficult for your child. Hence the timer strategy, right? What comes up must come down, and that usually happens within 20 minutes. Sometimes it takes longer. That's okay. I've already spoken to this, obviously. Rules of engagement. Use previously learned strategies. So this is where managing your own parental anxiety and fear will come in. You know that your child is likely to feel, pick an adjective for fear. So you also know what works for your child. Have that in the back pocket. Show up to school a little bit early. Practice these strategies before your kiddos get out of the car. And if they take a bus to school, practice them 15 or 20 minutes before they get on the bus. Odds are when our kids see their school, and when they see their friends, and when they see their teachers, it'll be a sense of normalcy despite the masks. Okay, favorite part. Any questions so far? Doesn't look like it. Nice, interactive. That's fine. Here's what not to do. We don't want to help avoid situations. We don't want to rescue a child from a scary situation. We don't want to pay too much attention to the fear, whether that's positive or negative. And we don't want to punish our kids. So when it comes to avoiding situations, that's actually a maladaptive coping mechanism for fear. When we avoid situations, it reinforces that we have something to be afraid of, when in fact, we just need better tools to cope with that situation. This is a really great example. So, you know, you and your partner or your husband or your wife have decided, yep, little Johnny, I don't know why I keep saying Johnny, but Johnny it is. Little Johnny is going back to school. Johnny might really be afraid of going back to school, and he might beg and plead, Mom, please don't send me back to school. Please, 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 I don't want to go to school. What if I don't want to come home and give you COVID? You're going to probably feel mom and dad guilt here. Whatever you do, don't help him avoid situations. Stick to your guns. Don't help to avoid. Come up with positive coping mechanisms. To help avoid is to help that fear to be reinforced. To the same degree, we don't want to rescue a child from a scary situation. Where this might come to play is, every child has a cell phone now, or most kids do. You might get a text or call from your child while at school. Come pick me up. I can't do this. And if they have a valid reason, fine, go for it. But if they're speaking out of a place of fear, and you know your kids best, if they're afraid, help them to use the strategies you've learned rather than going to rescue them. Again, this reinforces to your child that what they're afraid of is something to fear. We want to reinforce to our kids that even if they're afraid, they can manage it. They can cope with it to the point where if they do that, it becomes less scary. We want to also not pay too much attention to the fear. So, we want to talk about it and we want to help them move through these strategies, but we don't want to keep bringing it up. And we certainly don't want to criticize or tease the person for feeling afraid. And that leads into punishment. Like I've been saying, fear is a natural human emotion. And I don't know about my audience today, but when we're punished for things that we have no control over, like feeling fear, that reinforces shame, it reinforces guilt, and it reinforces embarrassment. And when kids feel that, they tend not to talk anymore. They tend to shut down, and that's not what we want in our relationships with our kids. So, again, focus on what they can do rather than what they can't. Feel frustrated, that's fine, but try your best not to communicate that frustration to your kiddos. Talk about it with somebody who you trust, who is another adult, whether that be your mom or your partner, etc. Okay, so we are at 35 minutes. I zoomed through that presentation. I don't think there are any questions because Alyssa would have brought that up. So to summarize, you have the strategies you need now. We're going to summarize this for you. We're going to send it to you in an email, the webinar, I mean, along with some other helpful articles on how to talk to teachers and your kids. At the end of this presentation, here it is. This is the book that I was talking about. They've got some helpful strategies in there related to fear. Okay, if there are no questions, I am happy to end the webinar. Thank you so much.